everybody, and welcome to another episode of What's on Your Mind. I'm your host, Nimari Bewu, or that African butterfly, as I'm known in social media. I am so excited to bring you another episode, not just of What's on Your Mind, but Pride Month, What's on Your Mind. I love these conversations. Today, I have with me Dr. Keonna Freeman. She is a MS BCHHP BSOCSCI. We're going to find out what all that means in a moment. But essentially, she is a mental health professional in Newcastle, Delaware, that specializes in mental health, counseling, and neuropathy. She is also the owner of Freely Life Services, whose mission is to strengthen families, community systems through programming and charitable efforts so BIPOC, women, and LGBTQ plus individuals overcome barriers to learn, live, and laugh freely. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Such a good time to come and chit chat with you always. So I appreciate the welcoming offer to have me, to come in and talk about gender
Absolutely.
identity.
Yes, I love you sharing your knowledge with us. But before we get into all of that, can you explain what those letters mean on your name?
Yes, everyone always has those questions. People are like, "Are you an MD or a PhD?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a DSOCSEI." So, my doctorate is in prevention, and the focus in prevention. So, doctorate of social science in prevention, where we focus on prevention of mental illness symptoms, prevention of drug and of substance abuse. Physical ailments, right? Prevention as a whole, because as we know, everything requires preventative measures. MS, my master's is in family science. So I studied the family, basically. The easiest way. I studied the family and all things related to the family system, family dynamics, family interactions. Then my bachelor's degree is in health sciences. And then my associate is also in health science with a nursing concentration. So when I finished with my master's, I went and became board certified in holistic wellness, which is where you get the naturopathic part, addressing wellness as a whole, the whole self, and natural wellness. So that is what all of those letters mean.
Those letters, they combine to make a good combo of knowledge to help us with this, which is what we love.
Yes, they do.
Okay. So starting off, what is gender dysphoria, and what are some other, because the talk of LGBTQ plus transgender, non-binary, there's so many, can you tell us what those phrases mean, non-binary, transgender, and then also what is gender dysphoria?
Yeah, so transgender is a person who has transitioned from their, what we say, natal, what they were born as, and have transitioned to who they actually are, right? So we'll see, you may see trans male or trans woman, male to female, female to male transition. That is what transgender is. When you hear gender nonconforming, those are our friends that have the pronouns, typically she, they, he, they, or they, them. And that just means they don't put themselves in a box of a particular gender or the gender that they were born as. And then gender dysphoria is basically what leads those folks who are transitioning, transgender, gender nonconforming. They are born as, right? I am a cisgender woman. You are a cisgender woman. This is who we were born as. This is how we identify as, because that's what we feel. Gender dysphoria is when you are born as one gender and you just don't in any way feel like that is who you were meant to be. And then, after some time, you come out, or you decide that you want to live your truth. And you end up transitioning or non-conforming, or both, right?
Right.
She, they, he, they, he, him, she, her, right? We acknowledge all and honor all of these pronouns for those particular reasons.
Now I have a question with that because I
Mhm.
think something that confuses people a lot is if you want to talk about transgendered, it's someone who feels like they were maybe born in the wrong or not the right gender, right? It might be a male who feels like they should be more female or more vice versa. But
Mhm.
then you have non-conforming or non-binary who's like, well, I don't feel like I'm either. And it's almost like, well, how can that be? Like, shouldn't we all feel one or the other? Like, we might feel that we have more tendencies towards one. Like, I definitely like love my feminine power, but that doesn't mean I don't have like moments where I'm like, oh, that's more
Mhm.
masculine energy, as they say, right?
Mhm.
So like, how can someone be binary and not feel a pull towards either? I guess is the question.
You know, that is for the non-binary person. I mean, and it is exactly how they feel internally. Why they feel it, right, is completely based on the individual. Should they lean more towards masculine, feminine, either or, right? We no, it's completely based on the person. A lot of people feel like, folks should be one or the other. I always say nothing is black and white, right? Everything's a big, beautiful ball of color, which is how we come, which is where the LGBTQ plus comes in. We're this big, beautiful rainbow of color because we know nothing's black and white, not, at least
Mhm.
not for us, right?
Yeah.
For other folks, it might be, but for us, it is not.
I think that's one of the nice things about tapping into the LGBTQ plus community is like you realize how, I guess for me, like how much those lines that we're taught to color in between are really just arbitrary. Like they're not actually set in stone hard lines. It's like if you want to follow them, great. And if you don't. And you don't necessarily have to box people in to these things of right and wrong, especially because if you study just over time how things change, even something as simple as like men wearing skirts, right? Like right now people are losing their minds over men wearing skirts, but if you go back to other cultures, other generations, they full on wore dresses and that did not take away from their masculinity. There's nothing about the things that we hold so important to our gender roles that are really actually defining of our gender roles.
Right. Yeah, that is accurate. And you're right. People are losing their mind. And I often wonder, why can't we really just mind our own homes, right?
Right.
And I know sometimes some people are minding their own homes in probably the worst way. Maybe their child is that person wearing a skirt who they feel like shouldn't be. I'll say mind your own self. Mind your own self. It is not up to you to say men should not wear skirts, women should not wear pants. Like, why?
Right. Why
Right?
is it hurting it? Yep. Can you discuss the importance of using inclusive and affirmative language when speaking to members of the LGBTQ plus community? Because I think that's an area where people tend to like roll their eyes or it's not important or it's not a big deal, but it actually is.
It's so important in the LGBTQ plus community. Sexual orientation and gender identity. It's so important to us. So using inclusive language, which starts with the basic, right? What are your pronouns? Eliminates the microaggressions and even the mental illness symptoms that really come from folks who don't understand the importance of it. I'm going to give an example. So I have a private practice where I treat folks with who are experiencing mental illness symptoms, but also like physical symptoms. Right? It's holistic. So spiritual, economic, socioeconomic, the whole self. And the first thing that a person will see when they go to the website is that big old blurb, that disclaimer, that very important fact that Freely Life Services, as well as Freely Integrated Health Wealth, which is the healthcare side of my business, we are inclusive. We are inclusive of gender identity, race, ethnicity, religion, right, spirituality, or non-religious or spiritual beliefs, and that brings a wealth of people. I mean, the inquiries about when can I get an appointment, when can I get an appointment, comes flooding in because we are so open, and being open is what helps people feel welcome and support it. You don't have to love them, but support them, respect them, welcome them. Like, it's so important with LGBTQ because it is a big part of who we are. And I say we because, as you know, right, I identify as lesbian. So,
and you recently got married.
and I got married. I did.
Congratulations.
Don't make me start blushing.
Beautiful.
Nehemiah, it's not what we're here for. I'm about to start blushing. Yeah.
You're welcome. What do you do? Like, how do you incorporate gender affirming care into like your counseling sessions just to create that environment, that positive environment for them?
Yeah. So the first part, like I said, is when you go to the website, there's that inclusive statement. And then the intake, which is equally important. The intake, when my clients come in to do their paperwork, there's a whole section. How do you identify, right? What is your gender? We ask about your pronouns. So yeah, there's a section for you to click whatever your pronouns are. There's a section to click your gender identity. There's a section to click your race, your ethnicity, your religion. And also within those sections, if you don't want to be put in any kind of box, you can there is a section that says that I do not conform with XYZ, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And from there, I review the demographics because that's where it is. I know, okay, this person identifies as she, her, he, they, he, him, or neither, right? They, them. And I move into our sessions based on what I am advised of.
Now, I think that when we think about, the terms, the initials, the all of it, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming for people. And I think that often we prescribe someone's reluctance to acceptance as them being disregarding of it and not caring. But I do think sometimes it comes from a place of just being like overwhelmed and confused and being like, forget it. I'm not even going to like address or deal with it. But as you just mentioned, like those affirming words and those things are important. So what's a good way to sort of like approach that topic or guide someone who you feel like is just not understanding of it? Like, how can you help them enter that space better?
Well, the first part is validating how they feel. It is valid if you feel overwhelmed by all of the letters and the identities in which you don't understand. That is perfectly fine. I cannot say that within the LGBTQ community, there are not folks that don't feel overwhelmed. We have something, right? There's something for all of us. And before there wasn't a term for all of the different identities. And now we are able to put a term to it. And it's okay if you feel overwhelmed. I think the issue comes when a person is not willing, right, to learn and open up their mindset to it. And with that, and not saying that you need to be a part of it, but just saying the way that we learn our alphabets, we learn math, right? We learn history, we learn science, we learn all of these things. The LGBTQ plus is another piece of education and learning that we have been around for centuries. I mean, and so what makes it an issue is not that you feel overwhelmed. It's okay. It becomes an issue when past the feeling of overwhelmness, when we have walked you through it and say, okay, you're overwhelmed. Let's talk about it. Let me explain it to you. Here's some basic things that you need to learn that you're just like, absolutely not, right? I don't agree with it. I don't like it. I don't approve of it. I'm not learning. That's when it becomes an issue, when you are neglecting to be educated on it.
Yeah, I can agree more. And there's a great question in the chat I'm going to get to in just a moment. Okay. But I did want to ask.
There's questions in the chat.
There is, yes. But I did want to ask, though, it's always been so fascinating to me that it feels like people are okay with certain things as long as we don't put words to them and we don't speak about them. And I'm fascinated by that because it's like, people will talk about their aunt with the roommate, their uncle with the best friend, the girl or the person, I guess the phrase they used to be like with a little sugar in their tank, or like whatever the little phrases are. Like, we know that gay people have been around forever. And for the longest time, people, like, as long as we weren't talking about them and as long as they hid it, it was okay. But the minute they want to be like, hey, this is who I am, accept me for who I am, then it's a problem. And like I said, I'm fascinated by the logic of it's okay if there's no name to it, but when we put a name to it, now it's a problem. Especially when there's so many bad things that we need to be addressing, that it's wild to me that this good thing you essentially love is a problem. Like, what, I guess my question in that is like, what the heck? Like, what is the mindset that causes that?
I would say people are selfish. I don't know what else to call it.
Right.
They say ignorance is bliss, and I'm just like, but why? Right. Um, One thing I will say about the LGBTQ community, not everyone, but most folks, is that we let folks go and live and be who they are, right? Who are we to be like, okay, well, I was raised by a mom and a dad, but I like a woman, like what's wrong with mom and dad, right? Who are we? Who is anyone to say that, right? It's not okay as long as it's hidden. Nothing is okay as long as it's hidden, really, right? I mean, it even takes, and now this is going to get a little bit off track, but it takes me back to, and I studied the family, so I think about when I hear things like it's okay as long as it's hidden, that makes me even think about family secrets. I mean, secrets aren't limited to LGBTQ folk. If we are hiding things and not talking about things, where does that leave us? It's just it'll be continual generational trauma, right? Because of it, folks have to hide their truth. Continuous generational trauma because something bad happened, but as long as we don't see it, we don't need to talk about it. No, we're going to bring it out. We're going to talk about it. We're going to be loud and proud. Like everything should be brought out and talked about. Because why not?
I agree. I think that part of the problem is that people put LGBTQ things under the category of something bad that they don't want to have happen, when they would realize if we would just accept it, it's not something bad, it's just a thing.
Yeah, it's just who we are.
Now the great question in there was from Robert Dickerson. He said, can adoption have a side effect on children being raised by LGBTQ couples?
So the research says no. And actually you could go online and find the research. I mean, when I think about adoption, you're going to have great parents who are adopted parents that are straight or gay, and you're going to have horrible parents who have adopted that are straight or gay, right? Depends on, again, the upbringing, the trauma, what someone feels is the proper way to parent, which is why we have parenting classes, right? When people are ready to adopt. Research says no, it does not. And actually, children are found to be in very loving homes of same-sex parents. That is what the research says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to admit, this is a soapbox subject of mine. Though if you've been following for a while, you know I have a few. But this is a soapbox subject of mine because the foster care system in this country is just so horrible. Like, it's so dangerous and horrible for children. And when I was in Florida, I used to volunteer as a guardian ad litem. That's where you act like on behalf of children in the foster care system. And we had to go through training, and it was so difficult for me. I grew up around some domestic violence. So like anytime that subject is brought up, it's a touchy one for me. October shows are rough. I cry, but
I'm glad you get it out.
Yeah, I get it out. But so listening, like I broke down at one point just listening to like the 911 calls of a child because it reminded me of a situation when I was younger. So for me, whenever I hear people who are anti-adoption purely because someone is LGBTQ, it like the rage it fills me with. The rage it fills me with because there are so many good, like you said, good and bad people on the adoptive end. And just because people are going to straight couples does not mean they're going to good homes. In fact, some of them are terrible, terrible homes. But for you to instantly say that there are all of these potentially good homes for children who need it, but because you don't agree with the relationship status of the parents, they have to stay in what we know is a terrible foster care system. Like,
Yeah.
I burn up. I burn up at the thought of it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And then there's that stigma that, oh, well, they're going to become gay, or they're actually going to become whoever they are. I mean, everyone who knows me knows I came out when my son was 1 year old, who's now 24 years old, cisgender, heterosexual, healthy relationship, right? Out of the home, working, and so inclusive. I love to brag about him because when I think about a person who could be everything else, right? Based on what society says, he is the most loving and inclusive Black man that I know, and I am proud of myself because we didn't hide anything.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I came out. Yep, I'm dating this person, and this is what this looks like. Da 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 da. And here's who you can love, and you can whatever you want to do, whoever you want to love is completely up to you. And my son is a heterosexual man, and so I use that example all the time when people ask questions about, well, what about the child growing up in the home, or what about adopting a child to same-sex parents? They're going to be whoever internally they feel they are. And that is okay. That it doesn't. My parents were man and woman, right? Did other than me being in the closet and not wanting to come out at a very young age, it didn't stop me from finding
right
I exactly love.
Yep. And you hit on something. You did. You absolutely did. And you hit on something, which I mention all the time, which is anytime I have an interview with anyone from the LGBTQ community, they all knew when they were young. They all knew when they were young. Absolutely. Whenever they decided to come out with it is later. But for most people, I hear like 6 and 8 is the ages that they start knowing within themselves that they are that. So to say the person's parents, yes, your parents have an influence on that, but my mom won't even let me say heck or darn, but I curse like a sailor. Your parents only have so much influence over you and what you're going to do. So whether it's your sexuality or the way that you behave, your parents influence that, but they're not going to make you one way or another. And if anything, the only thing I've found from people who are cisgendered, who was raised by LGBTQ parents, is that they're more open-minded. And that's actually what I love about the whole community. They're just so much more open-minded to you love who you all love, and it is what it is, and it's not a big deal. But it doesn't necessarily lean their sexuality one way or another.
You're absolutely right. And, I've shared my story before. Ensuring that our children understand all things, right? Age appropriate. I know there are different developmental levels that we need to start talking about things. But it's very important. Now, I knew at the age of 7, I shared this story with you before. I had no idea what the heck is going on with me, right? I am attracted to I think this little girl is beautiful, right? I'm a little girl and I had no idea what it was. And I don't know that my parents hid it, rather than just back then, it wasn't talked about. People just didn't talk about it. Now when I came out, right now we're talking about it, and it's like, oh, that's what that is. But as a child at 7 years old, not knowing, I'm locking myself in the bedroom trying to find ways to how does this child know to think about hanging herself, right? Because she don't understand why she's feeling this way. And so I feel like talking about it as early as we can is important, because children are actually attempting suicide and they are succeeding. I was the young girl that tried to tie the belt around the curtain rod, and the curtain rod knocked down. And today I'd be like, one of my ancestors was like, girl,
protection,
right? Get that out of here. And so luckily I didn't have to do anything next, but there are children that are, because either it's not being talked about, so they're confused about why they're feeling this way, or it's being talked about and it's being shunned, and they think that, oh my gosh, right? I don't know, because I can't do anything else. I don't want to like this person, right? I just don't like them. Right. So I think it's important to talk about it.
I agree. And it's so hard to do it age appropriate. It's something that, especially since having these conversations and being aware of it, I also now am aware of how much we instantly on children put like, it's so funny because we'll say like, oh, kids shouldn't have these like sexual conversations or know anything about sex, blah blah blah. But like the minute a little boy talks about another girl, it's like, oh, is that your girlfriend? The minute a girl talks about a boy, is that your boyfriend? Like we put it on them instantly from childhood. And then we wonder like why there's a problem. And so like I can't imagine being a little boy and that little girl in that situation, knowing that I have feelings for another little boy or little girl, but no one's talking about it, but they actually are talking about it, just only for the hetero kids.
Only for the hetero kids. It needs to be inclusive. I remember being a little girl. We started health when I was in like 4th grade, and we started it because we talked about good touch, bad touch. Eventually, those lessons and conversations in school went away. But I feel like it was so beneficial because outside of, and we didn't talk about LGBTQ now, granted, right? But I'm just saying, you said age appropriate. I think it's appropriate to talk about things as soon as a child understands, because there's social media and there are other children in homes where your home might be absolutely well versed, right, of the things that you are talking about, but the things that you aren't talking about, there are certain things happening to other kids that we don't even know. Then they're bringing it right to our children and everybody, right? And now our children are wondering, what the heck is this? I think it's important to talk about it as soon as the child understands. That way, the false narratives are kept right far away. And I have the truth because we're at home and we're actually talking about these things.
Yes, and I could not agree more. Like and I know it's easier said than done, especially as like someone here without kids, but it's just like and I've said what I feel about being dismissing things or being in delusion about stuff. It doesn't work. And I think that sometimes people do that with their kids because those are uncomfortable conversations to have. Like I can only imagine. But like you said, if you're not having them with your kids, trust me, they're having them somewhere else.
And social media is filling them in, right, baby.
And they are not getting it right. So if you actually want your children to hear it from you or to have your mindset on it, you have to approach it with them first, or it will be filled in. That gap will be filled in elsewhere. Izzy said it's very important to have open, loving conversations. Yep. And if we don't tell our children the truth, the world will tell them its version. And I agree. And something I think is great too. What was that?
I just said yes to Isabella. Yeah. That's accurate. Yes.
Yes. Something I think is great too is that there's so many like great programming, and I feel like it's just such a good neutral ground to have this conversation. So like there was the show 13 Reasons Why. I don't know if you remember when that came out. So it was super controversial. Parents were like, "This is so horrible," blah blah blah. I was watching it. I'm like, no, that was high school. Like if you were delusional about like, and that was high school when I went to high school 20 years ago. So I
high school when our parents went to high school. Like
so I can only imagine what it's like now. So instead of being in denial about what's happening, you should be watching each episode with your child and having a conversation about that episode.
Yeah. I mean, pick through it, right? Okay, I'm going to pause this. Let's talk about what just happened here. I mean, I was that parent. Yeah. My son, his friends used to want to come over all the time and they would call me mom, because Mom Dukes, she want to talk about it. Yes, let's talk about it. Absolutely. Whatever it is, let's talk about it.
I feel like I could talk to you forever. I love our conversations. A few more just on the mental health side. Like, how do you address and we've talked a little bit about it, but like, how do you address the need, particularly of people who might be questioning or exploring their gender identity? Like, how do you, as a clinician, but how could a family or friend help also?
Yeah. So as a clinician, the one thing that I do is I'm relatable. So, I don't go into full detail about my life story, but I definitely let them know how I identify and that I understand. And the one thing about this practice is it's an open, confidential, safe space. And I don't limit the way that they need to communicate it. You need to sing, cry, curse, laugh, dance it, write it, right? Whatever you need to do, put it in the chat. It is however you need to communicate it is absolutely okay. So I try to make it as safe a space as I can, so that they can openly talk about it. And then whatever resources I cannot provide, I send them to all the other, because Delaware is so good organizational wise, all the other resources that we have, I'll send them to.
Now,
Did I miss it? Did I get it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Oh, and also your mom is in the chat and said
Hey,
hello.
Mom.
Thank you for tuning in. So something I think that people often question or wonder about is like when we talk about age appropriate and then we talk about transgendered and like feeling that yourself, because we go through stages, right? Like someone might go through a tomboy stage or a girly stage, or like what or how is, I guess, how can parents sort of navigate that space? Because there's also like, what is the right age to start hormone therapy? Like, are they truly in a space where they should transition, or are they just going through a phase where they might change their mind later? Like, how does someone navigate that?
And I hear that question all the time. I will say initially, it's based on the person. A person who we might consider a tomboy might just be that, right? And they just know it. And then equally, a person who might be considered a tomboy actually might not know that it's more than that, right? And then a person who is a tomboy knows, right? Y'all calling me a tomboy, but this is just not who I know for sure that at some point I want to be my true self. So I will say this. People think that children are too young to know. We are not. I'm saying we because I was that child who knew. The way that you get to a complete understanding is by asking the questions, by having the conversation. How do you feel? This is how you look on the outside. Is this how you also feel on the inside? And later on, maybe they'll be this person forever, and later on maybe they might change their mind, but that is not for us to determine, and it is not for us to decide. They're either going to be their true, they're going to be who they are forever, or they're going to be like, you know what, this is what I thought, but it's not that, right? It's kind of like, how can I, and we're talking about gender, but I'm going to give an example of sexual orientation. When I think of, you know what, this is who I'm loving right now, but tomorrow I might love this person. I think about pansexual, right? I think about bisexual. It is okay for a person to know, not know, and know again, or just it be exactly that. I want to be this tomorrow. I want to be this today. Again, the focus should be worry about yourself.
It should. It should. And I always think it's almost kind of sad because I do think, well, not think, no, that gender is, or sexuality is on a spectrum, right? Like we're taught very much like you're one of these, but really there's kind of like a range of it. And I always almost feel kind of bad for the guys because I feel like it's more accepting of girls to like explore that range or even talk about being curious about it, or like the college years, like, and it's like, oh, it's okay, ha ha ha. But if a guy is like, well, I was thinking, I was wondering, I wasn't sure, it's like, you're gay, and it's a problem. And I feel bad that they don't have that space.
It's unacceptable for folks to think like that. But again, the world is the world, baby. Whew.
Yeah.
I wish that I could snap my fingers and just get everyone, to have an open mind. And I don't want to down the folks who don't understand, right? I am not calling you small-minded. I get it. Folks genuinely don't understand. That's when we speak about education and knowledge, and people retain information differently. God knows, and I told you this. It takes me a little bit longer sometimes, and this is an older age. I didn't realize it. I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's a processing delay. Send me my questions. Let me read through it. Let me sit on it a little bit. That's a thing, right, for folks. And so I'm not saying that if you don't understand, it's a problem. It becomes a problem when you are not willing to get the education. And again, we retain information differently. Perfectly fine. But the retaining of information and hate, right? Those two things are not the same. And so I urge my LGBTQ folk, as well as my heterosexual cisgender folk, to understand and know the difference. There is a difference between I just don't understand and I'm being hateful, because sometimes we are also guilty of wanting to point and be like, oh, well, this person said that, it's not okay. Let's take a step back and let's evaluate exactly what it is that is being said. This person just needs some education.
Yep.
Education changes so much, right? They say education is power. It is power. It is not limited to just heterosexual matters,
Yeah.
right?
True.
Knowledge is power for LGBTQ matters as well.
Yep. And it's a choice, which I didn't realize how much of a choice it was until the past few years when I realized how strong people's cognitive dissonance is. And that's making the choice not to accept reality. I did not realize how strong it is with people, but it really is. There are so many people who just do not want to acknowledge this. But like you said, it's important to acknowledge it. It's important to get that knowledge. As Charles said, that's why communication is key. And I could not agree more. It goes hand in hand, that communication, that knowledge. Now, I loved you sharing your knowledge with us. If people at home want to support or learn more, like, are there any resources or tools that they can reach out to just increase that knowledge so that they can be more supportive or more gender affirming?
Yeah. You want my resources or you just want all the resources?
Whatever you want to share to help the people.
So there's my website, of course, the Freely brand, www.thefreelybrand. So Freely is spelled exactly how it is on my name here, Freelee. There's a whole story behind that, right? My family's the Freemans, the Lees. I do everything freely. I wanted to change it to the name of the family, blah, blah, blah. www.thefreelybrand.com because there is that is where you will find information related to the nonprofit. The nonprofit does all of the public service work for LGBTQ folk, women, BIPOC, and then of course there's the healthcare practice. We welcome all people. The primary focus is mental health, right? Then we have organizations like PFLAG, I'm sorry, United Way, Intersections of Pride. Intersections of Pride is a really important organization for transgender individuals, especially because the founder raised a transgender daughter. I think she changed the rules and the laws of Medicaid healthcare when her daughter was ready to transition at a very young age. So Intersections of Pride. And then you can go to Google and you can put in LGBTQ affirming organizations in Delaware, right? And it'll come up. And then I know we are probably broadcasting nationally or internationally. Yeah. So, right, you can X out Delaware and put nationally, internationally, the Trevor Project, right? All of these types of organizations will come up.
Yes. Perfect. Well, again, thank you. I just realized how high this camera's been all day. But anyways, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a great conversation. You're so much knowledgeable and personable. It's just fun chatting with you. So I appreciate it.
Amade, it's been so great. I appreciate everyone who has tuned in. I appreciate you so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you everyone who tuned in for joining us. Come back again next week. It's our last Pride Month conversation and I have a clinician and we're going to talk a little bit about these don't say gay laws and how it's affecting kids and teens and LGBT. So it's going to be another great conversation. So please join us next week at 6:00 on Thursday. Thank you.
Peace, y'all. Bye.